Hello, namaste. So going through today, I just want to take a couple Bible passages, and I just want to explore this topic of aliens in the Bible. And then I want to, bring up the aliens also in like Indian texts. Because what we know, if we read through any of the Indian texts, and if you go to India, there really isn't an issue of do aliens exist. And I think like a lot of Westerners are still kind of like, do they exist? Do they not exist? There's a lot of government documents and things that have come out. Like, we just have to ask one question, like, are we the only ones in the universe? And you can just see just by asking that question, it really doesn't even make sense if the answer would be yes, because the universe is so huge and we know so little about it. So it would almost just make sense that, of course, there are other species or other, races or other beings of existence, in this huge conglomerate of like galaxies and stars, etc. So, and if you say that are we the only ones? Yes, we are the only ones. Well, then you have to ask the other question, well, then how did we get here? There's something that brought us here. And I know that there's Big Bang theory. I really think that a lot of these theories, little by little, they're just theories at the end. And if you think about it, what happens if you have something like the Big Bang? What would happen if you had like worldwide or galaxy-wide like destruction of something, like an explosion? What usually happens in an explosion? Usually everything is destroyed. So how life can come out of that? Okay, we know, for example, if a volcano explodes, life can be regenerated, but life was already there before the volcano, erupted. So, I think sometimes just common sense is kind of the easiest answer to all difficult questions. But, do your own research, because these are obviously my findings and my research and my thoughts and ideas. And I don't have all the answers myself either. And I have what makes sense to me, but I'm still a student and still searching. So that being said, I just want to bring up, so if we go through the Bible, where it talks about this, we can go right to Genesis chapter 6:4. And bringing this up, we can even see the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. So who are the Nephilim? Well, so the Nephilim were essentially the giants, or the possible offspring from the Annunaki and the humans, claiming to be from the sons of Anak, who were extremely large, formidable, warlike people. But if we move on to discuss giants, we can clearly see that these were no normal humans. So this, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to like put out the sources where this information can be found. So this is one place that we can find, in the Bible where they talk about something that could possibly be an alien race. So we know in the book of Samuel, for example, a famous giant was Goliath, who was conquered by David. And if we read here in 1 Samuel 17, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp, and his height was 6 cubits and a span. So we know from other research that has been done on the exact height as to what Goliath would have been. They estimate him at well over 9.5 feet, and they talk about, we were as small as grasshoppers. And you can go through and you can read the book of Samuel on your own. But we know, we have evidence of this already, is essentially what I'm saying. And The other one is the Anunnaki. I know that there's a lot of things, a lot of people that talk about the Anunnaki, which were essentially those that quite possibly have created us. And we can go ahead and see here in this example that it says in Genesis 1:26, there is the conversation in which basically our creator is stating, let us create man in our own image. So first of all, we have to ask, who is let us? Because it's obviously referring to a group of people. There is not just one single person that is creating humans, apparently. But, also if we go to the book of Enoch, for example, and they also talk about Enoch and his journey supposedly above the earth. So, when we bring up aliens, we have to think, well, were these, are these actually gods? Is this God doing this, or were these actually space travelers? And aliens, we can just simply liken to the word, like, not aliens like, little green men that you can find on different planets, but like just space travelers, because essentially an alien is anybody that doesn't belong to, the place that they were born, essentially. So you have space travelers, essentially, and even angels, depending on which terminology you use, if you use a religious terminology, you could say, well, these angels are essentially space travelers, are they not? They're flying around, doing what they need to do, traveling across different dimensions. Well, they're essentially space travelers. So it would just make sense that these Anunnaki, they're traveling around space. And as we can, that being said, now if we look in some of the Indian texts, it was already talked about here in this book, the Padma Purana, that there are 400,000 species of humans and subhumans. So what does that mean? That means that we are not alone. There is more than just humans. And, we start to look at the different gods that exist in India. We have Shiva, which is the blue-skinned god, probably the most famous of all, Shiva the destroyer, who, not necessarily about destruction of the material world per se, but destruction of ignorance. So when we pray to Shiva, we actually want the veil to be lifted. We want ignorance to be conquered. We want true wisdom. Shiva is essentially swallowed the poison to save the world from destruction. Then you have Hanuman. Hanuman is another Hindu god, and he was essentially loyal to Ram and Sita. And he was the giant monkey god that basically flew from India to Sri Lanka to save Sita, which was Ram's wife, to save her from the Asuras, or the demons. Then you have Lord Ganesh, the elephant son of Shiva and Parvati, who he has the big belly and he gives material boons. So if you want money and wealth and knowledge, you can pray to Lord Ganesh. And then we have Krishna, who is one of the main characters in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, and is usually depicted as, playing a flute. Just a few of these gods that we can consider from Indian texts. And if we read any kind of Indian, ancient Hindu texts, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Gita, you'll actually notice that there are many of them. And we have to also remember that these texts came at about the same times. Like the Vedas are some of the oldest texts in the world and date back even farther than 5,000 years. So are these essentially, could they be the same ones that are in the Bible? Could they be the same ones that are in other places that we find throughout the world? Are these the same space travelers that we're finding in multiple texts? the Indian texts openly discuss that, 400,000 species of humans and subhumans, that they travel in vimanas, which are the flying saucers, essentially, that they have superpowers, and essentially what are they? Are they gods like that we would consider them to be gods, like all powerful, all being? Or are they simply, more technologically advanced than we are? If they are traveling through space, they have to have some kind of technology that's more advanced than what we currently have, so you could like them almost to like the Avengers. And I think sometimes if we just watch Hollywood movies, we get more of a sense of the truth about the world that we live in versus what we learned in school. Because obviously, you don't learn anything in school. All you do is get, programs, and all you get from the TV is programs. So these gods or these space travelers essentially had superhuman powers and immortality. And in some cases, for example, the Anunnaki, how they had determined that they only lived about, maybe 400,000 years, even though some places, say 50,000. But to us, this would essentially be immortality. So I just wanted to bring that up, just looking at those two texts. The Bible, you can read this in Genesis, in Samuel, you can look at the book of Enoch. And then for, anything talking about aliens in India, you can read texts like the Vedas, the Puranas. Krishna is, one of the main characters in the Gita. And you can just go through and you can kind of, do your own research and kind of put things together. It would also be interesting to bring in like Greek mythology and all the gods that they talk about, also at that time, because there is a time that these space travelers did walk among us, and for some reason they're not right now. So either we have to wait until this whole cycle of, our current system collapses, and maybe they will come back. We have to wait and see. So let me know thoughts, comments, suggestions. Subscribe if you want to subscribe, like if you like the video, and namaste.